What's going on, everybody? Today is October 3rd. It's Tuesday, and you're watching the Daily AI Show live. So we are here. If you're happy to be new or happy to be seeing this for the first time, we're here every single day at 10 a.m. Eastern. Every single weekday, I should say. Thank you. Not on the weekends. I know. I always catch myself with that. Thank you, Andy. Every single weekday, 5 days a week. We stream live out to LinkedIn Live and to YouTube Live, but we also have lots of people who follow along on the replays. So for the replays, again, LinkedIn, YouTube, but also Spotify, where you can actually watch the video replay of it. Spotify is pretty cool that you can listen to it just as an audio podcast, or you can actually watch it as the video, as we were sort of seeing yesterday with Lex Friedman's podcast with Mark Zuckerberg and all the amazing stuff. First time I saw that was actually in Spotify, which is pretty cool. But it also goes out to Apple Podcasts and to Overcast, I think it's called. It's the orange one, Overcast. So we're expanding slowly but surely. And today's topic is about cookbooks. Not the cookbooks that you have in your kitchen, or maybe you do. It'd be interesting if you had AI cookbooks there. But really more about cookbooks. OpenAI and Anthropic both have a cookbook, and Anthropic really just released theirs a couple days ago, a week ago or something like that. Yeah. So let's just sort of, I don't know, does somebody else want to take a stab at a definition of the cookbook, and then what that would be, why it's helpful, why it's open source, these kind of things. And then maybe I have some examples. I can show what the OpenAI one looks like. I can show what the Anthropic one looks like, and just have a kind of conversation about it. But anybody feel like they want to take a stab at a definition for it?
Sure, I can. Basically, in this sense, a cookbook is, or why it's referenced as a cookbook is because they are recipes. They include all of the coding that you need to do a specific task. So someone's already gone through the process of identifying what all the dependencies are and the basic code to implement X, Y, and Z. So that's where that reference comes from, is they're just little recipes that include all of the little bit of code and step-by-step that you need to implement whatever the recipe is. And that I think is the simplest definition.
So I have a follow-up question to that. Would you say that by definition, a recipe in a cookbook, or something like that, has to have like an API call, or does it even matter? Would you even have to?
Almost 100% of the time I've seen is some sort of API call, because that's what you've built it for, is right, to accomplish a specific task that includes a particular API. So for like OpenAI, it's to access their GPT models via their API.
And so maybe to expand out here a little bit before we dive into the books, because again, we know we have listeners who are a little bit more advanced, but also the whole point of us doing this show was really to reach the, let's call it common business professional. My brain is usually in the sales side of things. If you can't see from my title there, Scaled is a sales consulting company. Anyway, business professional is really where we want to focus, because we all collectively feel like, oh man, no matter what we learn, no matter what we push, there's always like those 5 more things that we feel like we're supposed to know with AI. And so when we really conceptualized this show, the idea was like, hey, let's share as much as we can with that business professional that might be on LinkedIn who's like, what do I need to know about this? So let's just expand out maybe really quick to API if somebody wants to tackle that side of things, so that we have maybe a good baseline for what, a business professional would need to know about this.
All right. I'll give it the...
You feel like I'll bite.
Yeah, I'll do that. So an API is an application programming interface. The web is really this network of different servers that have been mounted by service providers. And most of those have a browser access that you can actually see, some kind of user interface. But they also have services and data available and other processes that their server can execute that are available on the back end through what's called an API, an application programming interface. And that allows a computer with the correct script to make a request to that server that then retrieves a payload that is delivered by that server. So the base example that we're talking about here is OpenAI, their large language model, ChatGPT, has an API. So people who are working using computers to automate, or a playground in which the API is accessed, that's a new term of art, actually, a playground that I wasn't familiar with until LLMs came along. But in the playground, you're accessing GPTs from the API side, the back end, rather than through the ChatGPT user interface that was delivered by OpenAI. So it's a step toward automation and for programming to get the same results that you might have to type from your keyboard through the browser, but do it programmatically on the back end, accessing the server endpoints that are published by those service providers that give you access to their functionality.
That was awesome. Glad you're the one that answered that. That was fantastic. Well, let's talk really briefly just to add to the end of that. So when you have a OpenAI license, when you have a Anthropic license, or a not a limit license, an account
subscription. Yeah, you have an account.
Yeah, prescription, right. You can basically create secret keys. These secret keys, these API keys, allow you to call out to these other places and make connections, but it's doing it through your account. And the reason that you need to keep them secret is because other people, if they had my OpenAI API key, then Beth or Jimmy, whatever, could run thousands of requests through it and run up the bill for me pretty quickly. So you have to be careful with that. And so that's just one part of it. I mean, a real good example, or an easy example of this would be if you go to a tool like Zapier, if you go to a tool like Make, which are automation platforms, there's others out there. Then let's say as a business user, you're like, look, I'm having a real hard time with adoption. I would love it if our marketing team was using more ChatGPT, but I can't get them to go over to ChatGPT and log in and do that. Also, they would all have to have their own individual accounts. So I'm going to go ahead and create a simple Slack message for some marketing process that happens multiple times per week, because that's really the way you would want to use it. So maybe it's like an idea for a new image or something like that. Some sort of process that they're going to do over and over and over and over again. And so that business, owner, tech department, whatever it is, doesn't matter how big the company is, may say, hey, look, to solve this problem, to eliminate this barrier, this pain point, I'm just going to go ahead and use a Zapier, let's say, and I'm going to connect it to Slack, and I'm going to connect it to OpenAI through my API key for the business. And now anybody that's in that and has access to that Slack channel can just call, like, just as if they were using ChatGPT. On the back end, it's going to leave Slack, go through Zapier, go through OpenAI. It's going to get the answer, and it's going to come back the other way. The end user just sees the response in Slack. They don't see the rest of it. And so that could be just a really easy way of doing something like this. Now, the cookbooks, as we can share here, go way above that, way, like to calling to do all sorts of stuff, like semantic searches into Pinecone and different kinds of connections, which truthfully are definitely above my head. I understand what they're doing, but it's not something I'm personally doing or creating at this point in my career. But it might be helpful to kind of look at those. But before we do that, any other, maybe points you guys feel like, so we feel like we've kind of hit it in terms of what it is and how it works?
I think so. I think the main thing to remember is that a cookbook really helps developers shortcut the development process of any particular tool or service that accesses that particular AI. So things like some of the featured recipes on the OpenAI cookbook are like fine-tuning chat models. and adding search through the API so that you can include that in your own product and things like that. So I think that's one of the main use case for it. Now it also because it provides these code snippets essentially and provides you a breakdown of how it functions, it does also give people who need to create their own implementation, or they find something that someone's already created and it fits into what they're trying to do. So it kind of lowers the barrier there and speeds up the development process.
Right. It's really helpful for people who learn by seeing how something is done, as opposed to instructions about how you might do it, right? Because these are examples, and these are examples created by the people who created the thing, right? So what did they imagine? What did they see as the possibilities? And that can just spark stuff. And all tech is overwhelming. Seriously, even for tech people, all tech is overwhelming. So we're all pattern recognition machines. It's okay. Like every time it says Pinecone, you can just go thingy and read through and see how it's moving into that, right? Like, and also join the AI exchange, and we ask questions. But Carl, you were going to say something.
No, I think from the just one bit, like from a business perspective, what I've been seeing a little bit of the cookbooks that some business owners have done is more around database, right? To be able to, like, say, leverage a whatever knowledge set that you may have, and then like what Brian was talking about, how can we access that database in such a way that at the end, for the end user, they can access it through, I don't know, a medium or a channel, aka Slack, instead of trying to go to one place. So like, I know we have a bit of work around cookbooks for Confluence, where people in our company on Slack wants to access Confluence, but Confluence is like, their search system isn't very good. The way that things have been laid out have been over years, so it's all over the place. So if you can, say, from an AI perspective, build a chatbot around Confluence and run it through Slack, but then you also have to create different levels of like who can access what, who can access certain things, what can't be accessed. There's a lot of different moving pieces to that. So how do you do that? And I think, like, so for a business though, that would be something to consider if you have like big sets of data and you want people to access it, but not having to go to the actual database.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And I think what I picked up on what you were saying too is, or sort of everybody was saying, which is like, if you have an idea before you were to invest into maybe somebody who has AI, IT, solutions or anything like that, it might be easier to go into something like this cookbook. This is OpenAI's cookbook, and look for potential solutions that match or mirror what you're looking to get out of it. And that could be a huge time saver. It could be a huge money saver, because having that recipe, having those directions on how to do it. So just let's look at them. Now, if you just look at this before we scroll down, it looks like it's very, very simple. But these are just popular and featured. And I do want to point out something, like, look at some of these dates on here. In fact, I'll make it maybe I can make it nope. There we go. A little bigger. But like December 16, 2022. So number one, OpenAI has been around longer than ChatGPT. When we're all maybe more familiar with it in 2023, they had GPT-3, going back 1 or 2 years, I think, in some cases. And then obviously had ones before that the general public probably isn't as familiar with. But if we scroll down here, you can actually see it says 112, and we can actually filter through to different things. Like if we wanted to talk about Whisper, which would be like transcription and things like that. There's different ways, Dolly for image. There's different ways you can do, and you can see that there's tags in here. But just I didn't want to like just randomly scroll on here. There's a lot of stuff on here, so let's just bring up an example. That's not it. Be helpful if I had it in order. But to how to format inputs into ChatGPT models, and what's the other one I have? Semantic search with Pinecone and OpenAI. Let's use this one. So, in this, and what I love about it is there's like a definite intro to this. It does remind me of actually seeing like the types of recipes, especially today on the internet, where it's very rarely is the first line 2 cups of sugar. Usually there's some sort of story baked into it, right? No pun intended there. Into the recipe. And my it'll start with something more like, I always remember sitting in my grandmother's house and smelling the sweets, the smell of cinnamon on,
I don't
and then like
I just need the
90
recipe.
pages later, they get to the recipe. Like you have to scroll 4
I need
days.
the recipe. I don't need this.
Yeah. But what's nice, at least in these, is that somebody like James Briggs here from, back in March has taken the time to sort of break it down. We've got a great visual. If you're more of a visual learner, you're kind of showing about what's going on and where Pinecone comes into play here and comes out to the thing. And it's like, let's get started. Here's the setup. Here's the first thing we need. Okay, there's some code there. We need to create some embeddings. Mm-hmm. And then on and on and on, popular index and everything else. Yeah. So hopefully, if you are able to, follow along and you can do these kind of things, if you have maybe a bit of coding experience, then this is probably a really easy way to take a solution like this. If you were starting to think about, semantic search, or you were interested in Pinecone, this could be a great way to dig into this a little bit more. So that's one example. What was the other one? How to format inputs from Ted back in March, again, several months ago, but here's an example of a chat API call, which is great because this is a little bit more like beginner friendly. Like, oh, okay, I get it. I'm familiar with messages and roles and stuff like that. And so I can kind of look through this and get some more understanding of it. And I even like it here. As you can see, the response objects have a few fields, and just taking the time to break that out. And I didn't read all of it, but it says orange who. So I'm assuming it's a knock joke, like orange who. That's what I thought of when I first saw that. And on and on and on. So
one of the things that you just said was, if you understand this, or if you're familiar with code, and I want to say that if you print that as a PDF, you just go to your browser thing and print it out and upload it to ADA, which is Advanced Data Analytics, or Claude, or the upload LLM of your choice. Those are the 2 big ones that I use. You can say, I'm really interested in this. I'm not sure I understand everything. Can you walk me through this step by step? And when you get to a place where you're like, I got no idea what this means, then you can use AI to tell you and walk you through. Like, go ahead and open Visual Basic Code. And if you don't know how to do that, like literally, I've done this with I've had AI walk me through step by step what I needed to do in order to do something.
I love
Let's
that.
also think about, that many others, that's one workaround from the overwhelm that you referred to, that everyone faces when they look at code like that and they're not a computer science major. Let's talk about those who have wrapped these kinds of cookbook ideas. There's a finite set that are offered there to developers by OpenAI, and similarly for all the other providers who list out their cookbooks. There are people who have wrapped those concepts into objects that are drag and droppable in low code or no code systems. So you don't really have to use the cookbooks, but the cookbooks, reviewing them and seeing what OpenAI over years has said could be done with our application, that's a useful step. But now go and see if you can find a low code or no code version of that lets you just point and click to get the same functionality.
So there's frozen dinners, there's HelloFresh, and then there's You Have a Garden. And you can choose your your level of interaction that you would like.
I want the
Prepping
personal
it.
chef, Beth. You left out the
Oh,
personal
I'm
chef.
sorry.
That
Yes.
does it all for me, and also no dishes. Can we work that out?
I'm
I
not a
want to pull
foodie
this up
as
because
well.
we haven't talked about the other cookbook that's out, and there's probably several more. Just the two that we had in the show notes today were both OpenAI and Anthropic's. Now, we saw what OpenAI's cookbook looked like, right? You know, and then 112. Well, Anthropic just announced theirs. God, man, if I just put them all in the right place. And as you can see, there's a big difference. There's currently 3 recipes in this cookbook for Anthropic. But to be fair, they did just release it, and these are open source and they're user generated. So, you know, this will build up over time. Also, you know, curious, it only exists in GitHub. So there's like no other landing page for it. But I find it to be actually pretty impressive. So, like, this is the one I had looked at earlier today, and this one is about doing a Wikipedia search. These are, I think, as far as whoever wrote this, and it probably says Zach here, maybe from Anthropic, just to get this cookbook going, did a really good job of breaking things down. So it's like, let's zoom into the prompts. And we've got prompts here, and then there's just, you know, obviously it would take forever to read through this, but it's given some queries. If we go to the bottom though, and we start looking at the way some of the prompts are, if I can find it right in here, with the idea of this scratch pad, which this was really, really helpful to me. Not that I necessarily need to read this prompt, but just a good example, I think, of how a cookbook could be really valuable to you for something completely different. And I was like, oh, this is a really interesting idea. And essentially what it was just saying to Claude, hey, Claude, internally, use this scratch pad to make sure that you're following these directions. And I need you to kind of go back over them one by one to make sure you're doing it. And in this particular case, the question is, I need to find the release dates for the, oh, well, it's saying I need to find. The question was, which movie came out first, Oppenheimer, or Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. So what it's doing is saying like, hey, when these are recent events, so Claude would not have been trained on these. So they were saying bring in recent events because they're going to pull it from Wikipedia. And so it goes on to show how it does. And now we can actually watch as Claude works through the process and says, well, I need to find the first movie. And I did. And now I need to find the second movie. So now you can even see it saying like, so now I have enough information to answer the part of this question. Right. So it's just Claude, the system working through, which I find to be really, really helpful when you're trying to create net new prompts for maybe a totally different project. And you're saying, oh, I can watch sort of the brain of the language model, which can be really, really valuable. And so then you actually get it down here. Assistant, based on the information provided, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, was released first on April 28th, 2023. Oppenheimer was on the 21st. But was released first in April. Oppenheimer was released later in July 2023. Okay. So then it goes on and it gives a little more. And it's like, hey, sometimes it can get these things wrong. Here's some different additions and changes. And so in this one, it used about who won the 2023 NBA championship, who was whatever it was. There was another one in here. It was like the best player in 2009, so on and so forth. So again,
I can hear Robert in my head saying, but you could Google it. Right? Like all of these pieces. So just we acknowledge that these are just examples of the sorts of things that you would use that you couldn't Google it or do something like that. And and essentially what we're saying, because I think some people are watching that and starting to hear like the Charlie Brown teacher voice. And some people are like, you know, go faster. I want to see the rest of the page or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when GPS came out for the public, we started to go places that we wouldn't have gone. We trusted that we could get somewhere that we wouldn't have gone before alone with just a map. And that's what this is, right? These are very interesting maps to places, and AI is your GPS to help you get there.
Although I'll push back on that though, because what I'm finding more and more is that a lot of use cases no one can reliably access, or at the very least, it's scalable across multiple businesses. So like, for example, no business is going to go into GitHub. Like maybe a business with developers in it, but any other type of business, you'll get a lot of people, what is GitHub? And even if some people know, it's like, well, Charlie in the corner knows, but then Charlie's has a lot of stuff that they have to do. So they're not going to implement that on a scale that everybody can use. And I think like that's something, it's interesting how a lot of these tools are coming out. A lot of, and the Cookbook is one example, where they come out and people are excited about them. But then I start thinking, oh, this is an awesome use case for one person or 10 people, or maybe even 100,000 people. But can that be actually scaled to a lot more people? Can everybody use it? So I think that's where my mind is starting to go with a lot of these things. It's like, yes, it can, but can it really?
Well, that actually is a great point, Carl. That'll lead us into our TLDR, right? So we're here to help our audience apply it to their business. So that's the TLDR today, is what is one example of how a cookbook can be applied to a business. Go.
Well, I used the one earlier, and I'll just stick on that one. Like, to me, we talk about this a lot, which is just meeting the end user wherever they are. It can be the customer, but it can also be the employee. And so, to Carl's point, when we're trying to find solutions, oftentimes it's okay. This is this great solution, but will anybody use it? Will it actually get used? Will it have the adoption we want? And sometimes I think some of these cookbook ideas, or even more basic ones, and I'll just show it like super quick, like this from example, platform.openai.com examples, where we could go in and click and learn more about how to just do a very simple prompt, which is still a cookbook. It's just not an API call of Marv, the sarcastic chatbot, where we can get things like, how many pounds are in a kilogram? And the answer is this again. Please make note of this, like to stop asking, right? Something silly and a little bit more fun. Yeah. But my point to it is just to say, like, it doesn't have to be overly complex. Some of these are true, but I would say just focus on what's being done a lot at your business. And then like, what's one thing you could go in and try to remove from the system with AI, and do it in a way that that it's wherever the end user is. And I think cookbooks could, they can help with that for sure.
Absolutely. And I would say my suggested takeaway for businesses is look 5 seconds longer than you want to, right? Like be willing to go just slightly further in. I don't mean go to GitHub. They will do a non-GitHub version. This is Anthropic's first option, or someone will do the other cookbook because the first cookbook was intense. But as Brian just said, OpenAI's recipes are accessible and user friendly.
And I think my point goes to another point of the education portion and the change management portion, but rather from a cookbook perspective, if there's a way that, let's say you have found a solution for a company and you are implementing it for said business, is there a way that you can present it and educate people in simple terms, or can it be so seamless that no one actually notices, but it improves their lives, that they don't have to do anything? Like, if you can prevent them from doing multiple steps, you'll be the hero that no one sees. Or right. You can explain it to everybody in a language that was, oh, okay, I get it. So it's really simple for me to do. I think that's where, on that sense, I think that, that's where my TLDR is.
And I want to add to mine, I'm sorry, because he reminded me, and don't do this alone, right? The idea of cookbook may give the impression that you're alone in a kitchen cooking. like read go have conversations with people about what it is. That will immediately lessen the overwhelm and like exponentially increase the possibilities.
I'll say that cookbooks are, for slightly more advanced users than the typical business user. Your first resort, I think, would be to look at some of the automation systems like Zapier, Make, Active Pieces. Those are not completely devoid of technical complications, but they're a lot easier than having to learn Python and implement a cookbook recipe.
For sure.
And I'll quickly add, I think cookbooks, even if you have no technical background and it's a great source for inspiration. So if you're looking to solve a problem, or you're just looking to start a new project or new product, the cookbook is a great resource for inspiration on what to identify are niches for people to go explore. Even if you don't understand the Python code, it's a jumping off point.
For sure. And I'll just say, if you have insomnia, just open one up and just start reading from the top.
Who needs Ambien?
See where it takes you, right to La La Land if it's at the right time of day. So, all right, guys. That was good. I think that was a really good conversation. I'm trying to get back to my splash screens here as always. All right, guys. That's it. We almost ended on time today. We did pretty good. So that's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow and the rest of this week through Friday with 3 more AI topics. So come back and join us then. Until then, guys, we'll see you tomorrow.
Aloha.
Happy Tuesday.